Hey, Jennia, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
Doing very well. I'm excited to learn more from an editor. I love talking to editors because my brain doesn't work like an editor. I wish it did, and I'm trying to train it to, but it just doesn't work
We
that
need writers
way.
too.
Yeah, that's true. We all have our place in the authoring or the publishing world, I should say.
Exactly.
Um, so tell us a little bit about you. What are you about? What services do you offer? Have you written and published books yourself? I just want to learn a little bit about you.
The writing that I've had published is probably not that exciting. I wrote some peer-reviewed journal articles, some book reviews for the NHS dialogue about child development because my background was in developmental psychology with a focus on early childhood. So that's really where I started as far as my career. But I quickly learned that being in the research sphere was not really my thing. I
Mm,
enjoyed reading about research, but I didn't enjoy the actual research part. It just it felt kind of draining because you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, sometimes with hundreds of people. And I think it was the monotony of doing the same thing because even though there's variance, it's still just so similar. And working in fiction is the exact opposite of that because even if two books are similar with trope or their genre, they're still not the same. So it's just something
mm.
new and exciting constantly. And as for what I do, I'm a developmental and line editor for the most part, but I also do copy editing and help with other parts of publishing, such as marketing.
I mean, we'll get to the marketing bit. That's a beast in and of itself. Part of the
Oh, yeah.
topic that we're going to talk about has to do with marketing for sure. But
Mhm.
how did you fall in love with editing? What do you love about the editing process that makes you want to do this full time?
I have always been a person who reads all the time to the point that I would get in trouble at school. I would get in trouble with my parents. Put that book down, or I'm going to throw it away. We're supposed
Mm.
to leave half an hour ago. Hiding flashlights in my room so I could read in my room at night, that sort of thing. That's just always been who I am. But I'm also very analytical, and I'm sure that's because of my background and having worked in academia and statistics. And so it's a way to take those analytical skills and apply them to a different medium. But it's a medium that I enjoy. And it's hard to explain, but it's just, when you find something that's right for you and it just has that all encompassing feeling of, yes, this is what I should be doing. That's how I feel about editing.
Yeah, it's just so good that there are people like you in the world. Because if they were like me, I would run away from editing so fast. But I appreciate editors. Every editor I've worked with has impressed me with their skill, with their eye for detail and their knowledge about what's right, particularly in the language that they're editing, but also in the genre. Because
Right.
there's like stylistic things per genre, and there's all sorts of things that as a writer you maybe don't notice. I'm a pantser as well. So I
Okay.
don't I don't plan out my books. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing when it comes to editing.
It's a thing. It is just a thing.
It's
We're
a
not going
thing.
to give it a negative or a positive connotation. It doesn't
Well,
need either one. It just is.
correct. I mean, it is what it is, and I can't plot. I've tried, but I just appreciate the editing, and it's great. I've looked at your services, and it's impressive that you not only have an interest, but you can spend so much time doing it. These books take a very long time to write and a very long time to edit, and just having that patience and that interest is amazing. So thank you for what you
Well,
do.
thank you,
Say that.
because editors wouldn't be here without you guys. So thank
I
you.
suppose that's true. I mean, there's always like articles, scientific articles and research articles that might need editing, but I don't know if that's your cup of tea nowadays since you're into fiction now.
No, I have moved on from that.
You've moved on. You're done.
I still get the random request about, can you help me structure my essay or show me where my argument might be weak, but it is not my preference.
I can understand that for sure. So I'm really interested to pick your brain about finding the right audience, knowing your audience and understanding them, because this plays into not only the writing and the editing, but also the marketing piece,
Oh
which we
yeah.
can cover all of those separately. So, from your perspective, let's talk about the importance first off. So, from your
Mhm.
perspective, why is finding and understanding your audience so important?
Well, if you look at it from the very beginning part where maybe you're not even writing yet, It helps
Mm.
serve as a guide for as you are writing, because when you're stuck, you can ask yourself, well, would my audience prefer this happens, or would my audience prefer if this were to happen? And it gives you these little guideposts along the way, because you're also playing along with your genre and what's expected within your genre, which is
Mm.
also part of finding your audience. And you sort of want to follow these expectations just because, well, and you can see this if you go to Goodreads or similar and you look at reviews where someone has just thrown all these guidelines to the wayside and said, you know what, I'm doing my own thing, which is what we call literary fiction. But they market it as, sci-fi or contemporary women's fiction or something else, where there are these expectations that go along with it. And when you don't have your audience completely pegged, you might not be aware that these expectations are there and that you could be disappointing your readers just because your book didn't line up with those.
It's a really interesting thought. I'm pausing and reflecting because admittedly, I don't like, I'm an intuitive person. I tried in the way I write and the way I market, and we could go into that a little bit later. I'm reading a book on intuitive writing right now. It's fascinating. But
Mm,
I went into writing my books without a very clear picture of the demographic of the audience, which I don't think was a problem necessarily with my writing specifically, but it's
mm,
become a problem now trying to find those people to read the books, right?
yeah,
And I think, like you said, it really lends to the author knowing, especially when you're stuck. Hey, this is where I can go, or this is a good or bad thing in terms of tropes or characterization or plot or whatever.
right.
So how does someone find how do they go about researching and finding their intended audience?
A lot of the advice that I've seen on various platforms talks about making your ideal reader
Mm,
and narrowing that down to one person. And while that's helpful advice, it also narrows it down so much that I think you have the possibility of somehow accidentally blocking out the actual group that you're writing for,
sure.
your bigger population. But going into reading and writing communities or joining a book club, even where they read the same genre, I find those to be very helpful because, especially a book club, and there's so many online now where you can easily be in a book club with 100 other people reading the same book. You can get a really good feel for what people do and do not like within your genre. So if 80% of the people said, I didn't like this guy because he did this and this and this, or they have an issue with the ending and they say, the last 15% fell flat for me. And then they each go into great detail about why it fell flat for them, or why perhaps it didn't feel like it was within the parameters of that genre, which is what they were expecting to see. And that sort of informal information can be extremely helpful.
That is really interesting. So I'm not part of any book clubs, but I can definitely understand how that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
What would you recommend for someone who might be too introverted to join something like a discussion or a book club? Are those kind of like passive look in type situations? Can an introverted person still get involved with those?
Oh, yeah. I'm fairly introverted for the most part. Not so much online, but just going in with the capacity of I'm going to be a viewer. I'm going to take in all this information and see what I can get out of it. But sometimes, too, you can also look up a book that is similar to yours or that you believe is similar to yours, and you can kind of get an idea from where they've marketed and then ask yourself, okay, is this my audience also? Is this also who I'm hoping to reach? Do I think they would like my book too? And it's not cheating necessarily, skipping rules, but finding those other similar books and then looking at who they market to or who you believe their target audience is can also help you in the process too, especially if it becomes overwhelming and you just reach that point where you're like, you know what, I don't know, I have no idea, I'm just writing for myself, or I'm just writing for people who enjoy this genre, which is too broad, but it's still a starting point. And you can narrow it down a little bit that way because you can start to see patterns emerge. If people in the reviews all say, I loved this climatic scene, it really drew me in. And you think, oh, I write similar climatic scenes, so I must also be targeting these people who are, 30 to 50 and live in the Midwest or whatever.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm glad you said earlier that's not cheating. It's definitely not cheating. It's using your resources, right?
Yes,
Researching.
take shortcuts when you can. Take the available
Yeah,
information and work with it. There's no reason that you have to recreate the wheel.
absolutely. I think for me as an author, and I think there's other authors who might experience this as well. There's a little bit of a self-doubt
Mhm.
facet to this, right? Because certain authors that I love and books I would love to emulate in my writing in one way or another are like massive giants, author
Um,
giants, super successful. And I see that and think, oh man, there's no way. Like I'm afraid to
yes,
compare myself to this specific author because of how amazing they are. You've got a massive audience. They're making it's not about the money, but they've got enough business and readers that they're making tons of money. And to
right.
say in an ad or something that I tried to target, books like X, it's just I'm sheepish about that. So, what do you recommend to authors? Should they look for these big name authors? Should they look for kind of like more successful authors that aren't so big names? Is there a problem with citing these different authors? I guess what's your perspective?
The only problem would come if perhaps you're not self aware while you're doing it because you
Mm,
don't want to have that backlash from people saying, I'm not seeing this at all. I don't see where the similarity is. I don't understand it. But other than that, no, because we need to be picking comps that your reader base is going to be familiar with.
mm,
If you pick a book that was published to a very small audience and maybe 1% of the population has heard of it, that's not really helpful for you to use as a comp
mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
you're too niche now. It's not going to reach a wide enough audience where it's going to make sense to them.
yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I hadn't thought about it that way. Yeah, I just know that there's kind of a struggle for some other authors when they're writing or publishing their books, kind of finding those comps and making sure they're actually appropriate. One thing that I found it's helpful is I have asked some of my readers what they would think,
Mm-hmm.
as just because it's probably not ideal to have already written the book and not know this, but
Oh
I
no,
was
it's
there.
fine.
That
No, no, it's
totally
fine.
happened to me. I said, "What are some of the books that are comparable to this?" And it was
Mm-hmm.
interesting to hear their responses. I was like, "Oh, I can see it now that you say
Yeah.
that, but I hadn't thought about it until you brought it up." So yeah, and I'm a kind of a well-read person. I mean, I like to read. I've read ever since I was a kid. I used to read, 50 books a month, but now I'm an adult and 50 books a month is not realistic. I've got
Not
I've got
anymore.
stuff
Those
going
are the
on.
days.
Those were the good days. So, in the absence of time to do enough market research, what do you recommend for, busy authors who need to understand the market but maybe don't have time to join these book clubs that are reading multiple books a month?
Well, your suggestion to ask ARC readers is always a good idea because they're also looking at it from a different viewpoint than we are as the creator.
Mm,
And then as the editor, I will also list comps if someone asks for them, or I might ask them, do you have comps already? Do you know what you would compare this to and why? And it doesn't have to be books either. You can use any sort of media.
oh, true.
And
Okay.
sort of that it's a cross between this, and one is a movie and one is a book. And sometimes your book that you're putting out will be so unique that you almost have to use a comp that's not a book. But that's totally fine too, because you're still giving the reader an idea of what to expect, what they're going to find in your story, as long as it's something they're familiar with. Again, it doesn't have to be a book.
Hmm. I've never thought about comparing my books to movies, but it does seem kind of logical in a way. I mean,
Yeah,
obviously,
right.
that's not
They're
your
both
first
stories.
leap. Right. Story is
Mhm.
story. That's fascinating. So it's interesting that you brought this up as an editor. I would have never thought to have this conversation with my editors. And it's not a knock on my editors. They did an amazing job, but it does seem extremely relevant prior to you reading the book or even post reading to have that conversation to be like, okay, as I'm editing this, I just want to
Yes.
make sure, what were you going for? And if the answer is nothing, I don't know, then well, here's my impression. This is what I
Mhm.
learned or what I got from the story. I should have that conversation with my editors.
Oh, well,
That's
good.
smart.
I'm glad I was already helpful.
I need to do that. So for you, how formal does this understanding need to be? Do you recommend that authors write down their ideal audience, have a specific like template or whatnot for writing it down, or just think about it and have in their mind what they're hoping for?
I don't give anyone a strict process, just like I don't with writing, because I know that we all have very different ways of learning information, taking it in, absorbing it. So if you want to write down a character sheet and even assign your number one fan a fake name and all these
Mm,
characteristics and a daily schedule, go for it. If you're more of a visual person and you want to make a Pinterest board about where you envision your ideal reader living and what they look like in their day-to-day process, also do that too. A big part of it is just when you sit down and you're not thinking of anything else and you picture someone picking this book up and sitting down and reading it, what kind of person comes into your head? What is the
mm.
first thing that strikes you about this person? And why do you think that is? Why is that relevant to this person becoming your fan? So there's
All of those.
a little bit of
Um,
psychoanalysis.
yeah, I'm impressed that people. I think I do know some people that go into that much detail about their
Mhm.
readers, and I'm wildly impressed. That to me feels like an insurmountable peak, a mountain peak. I can't even plan. I don't plan my books. I hardly plan my life. I can't imagine mapping out or planning out the day for an invisible person who doesn't exist. But if that helps you, I think it's great that you mentioned, hey, that's an option. If that aids
Right.
you in writing, you do what you need to do.
And
Uh,
the key word there really is option. It doesn't
yeah.
have to be the way you do it. It's enough to say, my book is very similar to books A, B, and C.
Mm,
And then you try and think about, well, what do books A, B, and C have in common?
hmm
So instead of assigning characteristics to your intended market, you might say, my book is for people who enjoy happy endings.
mm,
Uh, my book is for people who like a lot of banter or a morally gray character. And you can
okay.
use you can use the elements that are present in your book to help assign your audience.
That's another interesting point. Yeah, see, these are all very helpful perspectives to have, particularly for someone who pantses their book. Uh,
And then
to think,
pants the
oh,
marketing.
and then pants the marketing. Yeah, so let's actually jump to marketing. So I think it's probably, I wouldn't say completely self-explanatory why knowing your audience helps with the marketing, but I just want to talk a little bit about it more specifically. So
Hmm.
how does marketing, how is that aided by understanding your audience and your perspective?
In a lot of ways, it might help marketing almost more than anything else because if you have to figure out how you're going to appeal to a group of people, you have to know who those people are.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who's seen Mad Men knows that you're not going to appeal to everybody. It's just like advertising. You're selling yourself, you're selling your book, but who are you selling it to? If you go up to a group of people ages, let's say 15 to 85, from all different walks of life, you're not really hitting your target market there. I mean, there might be a few people that are like, oh, hey, yes, that sounds good to me. But you've also wasted a lot of time and resources on all these people who are not interested and were never going to be interested. So you're really saving yourself time also by
Yeah.
making sure you have at least a rough idea of who these people are and what they're looking for.
Agreed. And I think there is maybe a misconception around understanding your audience or finding the right audience, creating the right audience, right, for yourself and for your marketing.
Right?
That if you are
Manifesting
pinpointing,
them.
manifesting your audience, uh, that if you're identifying these people or this type of people or person or whatever, that you are only able to sell your book to them. Well, that's just not true, right? That is just
Right.
how you target the marketing, the messaging, the images, whatever you're doing. And more often
Mm-hmm.
than not, people in other demographics happen to like it as well.
Exactly.
And I think people fear that they're limiting it to, well, I don't want to focus on that because what if I isolate that group and nobody else buys my book? Well, that's not what we're doing here.
Oh, right.
Which we're just coming up with them. I'm saying this like I'm an expert. I don't, I
Hey,
don't
I believed it.
do this very well, but I think logically, right, your messaging should be catered toward a specific group of people. Otherwise, it just comes off as fluff and kind of
Yes.
boring, and no
And
one
it's,
cares.
yeah, it's sort of like following that slope, that you see all the time in statistics classes where you're always going to have outliers. We're just going to casually use outliers here to mean people that maybe don't fit your exact parameters for your
Mm,
audience.
hmm
The majority of your people are going to be in the center of that giant bump. And those are the
Yeah.
people you're looking at. And yeah, of course, you're going to have people that are falling on either side where, let's say, they don't fit 90% of how you would describe your audience, but they're still interested and they'll still be drawn to it in some way or another. But you also don't want to discount word of mouth because look at all these books that until Bookstagram and Book Talk became a big thing, they weren't enjoying the same rate of success that they have now. So that shows that you find your real intended audience, you market to them, then they take your book and they just go all over the place with it and tell everybody in the world who will listen, hey, you need to read this. This book is awesome. And now, in a sense, you're letting them do your marketing for you because chances are people following their accounts would also be the same type of people that read your book since this person reads your book.
Mm-hmm. I'm still waiting for that day. Just kidding. No, there's some word of mouth that happens with my books, and I always appreciate people who share it with their family and friends. But yeah, it's just a powerful form of marketing because there's a lot of trust with it. That,
Mm-hmm.
as an author, trying to build trust with people who don't know you about your books and what's in them and what might interest them is challenging. It's not impossible. But
Right.
yeah, the friends and family trust of, hey, I've read this book and I love it. Well, they know that person and they trust them, so they're more likely to pick it up and read it. So it's
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
invaluable.
And they tend to know what those other people like as well. So,
Yeah,
like my mom and I discuss books a lot, and there are certain books that I really enjoy, but because I'm so familiar with her preferences, I can just immediately say, no, this is not a book for her.
right.
I'll recommend it to somebody else, but not my mom.
It's good that you know that. Otherwise, I'm sure mom would not trust your
Yes,
taste
this is me
in books.
marketing
Uh,
my book recommendation services to my intended audience of one.
yes. Well, see, there you go. But you know that audience very well, right?
Hopefully,
So,
yes.
something that comes to mind is when you've identified your audience, how does that have an effect on where you do your marketing? Now, I know this is tricky because marketing's everywhere.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
You can pay for marketing, you can do free marketing. There's social media platforms all over the place. Um, so once you've identified your audience, how do you know what the right platform is, or does it help you know where you should be
Yes, it
focusing your
does.
attention?
Yes, and a big part of it is going to be the keywords that you use.
Okay.
And romance is just the first one that comes to mind because they are very keyword heavy people.
Yes.
Yes, you have
It's a good
friends
way to
to
put it.
lovers and enemies to lovers and grumpy sunshine. All these phrases that might not make sense if you're not familiar with the romance genre. But knowing those keywords and knowing when to use those keywords. But if you hadn't done your market research, you might not be aware that these are important to include. Whereas including them does draw a lot more people to seeing your post or your ad or whatever it is that you're putting out. And likewise, people from different genres tend to hang out in different areas or discuss books in different areas. So that's something to look into also. So if you go to, one social media platform and you realize that this online book community is focused only on romance, but you wrote a thriller, then maybe this isn't the place to be marketing your book and it might be a waste of your time. And that's not what you want because the whole idea of developing this idea of your intended audience and marketing to them is maximizing your marketing, not just throwing it out in the wind and hoping for the best.
That would be so nice if you could just throw it out to the wind.
I'm
Yeah,
just
do
imagining
something.
someone yeah, blowing a dandelion and watching the leaves just gracefully flutter away. Yes, go reach
That's
everyone.
the beauty of it. I mean, I think there was, and I think there's this kind of stigma around publishing. There's a lot of people that think, hey, I can put up a book, whether
Mm-hmm.
traditionally or independently, and it'll just sell. Well, that's not the case. I mean, marketing
No.
is a lifelong effort. And if you come into this thinking otherwise, then you're going to be sad
Yes, you
because
will be very sad. The sadness will
it's
never end.
it will never end. Now, I don't love the marketing aspect of it, but even talking about this, like for someone who hasn't, I'm telling on myself a little bit today. I have not specifically sat down and thought, who is my audience? I have like little inklings of these are the people that I'm kind of targeting, but I think for me, it's a little bit of a committal issue. I don't want to commit to. I'm like, well, this is what I was going for. This is the audience I'm going for, and it's my own problem. But even thinking about this, oh yeah, I could make this TikTok video more targeted, more effective, or this Instagram post, make it a little bit more pointed towards that specific demographic or audience or whatever you're going for will actually help with the language. And I forget that, right? I'm
Yeah.
scrambling constantly to think about what to post. But if you know your audience, it might become a little bit easier to know, like, oh, they would appreciate seeing X or hearing X or whatever it is.
Or even inspiration for your book. So they might want to see certain areas and how they influenced something. And then some of the different genres too, you'll see that they have something sort of slotted in social media for every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like First Line Friday, those sorts of things. So you already have some material there, even if you didn't realize it. But a lot of the time, readers are also interested in knowing who you are or what you're working on next, or maybe what you're reading and enjoying. And that's
Mm-hmm.
partially because there's that assumption, again, if they enjoyed your work, then they will probably enjoy your other work as well as works that you find enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
And so just use it all.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said about knowing the author, knowing the people that they're watching. When you if you're watching like a cold uh, author without any personality, then it's less likely for them to be interested in reading what you have. But yeah, hearing what they're up to, what books they're reading can definitely lend to that. I was just looking at your Instagram, and you have one of those beautiful Instagram profiles.
Oh, thank you.
Um, where everything is just perfect. I love those accounts. They're amazing. And I tried for about a hot second when I first got on Instagram to be that way, and then realized hilariously that was just not me. Because I'm colorblind for one. And
Oh,
and
there you go.
two, I don't know what colors look good together, and my design skills are just laughable, but it's okay. I mean, I think it's great that you know your strengths, you know what you can put into it. And, some people may be better at making videos, some people. So, guys, do what's comfortable for you is one thing when it comes to
Yes,
marketing.
yes, I completely agree because you will end up resenting it if it is
Yes.
not really your style or what you're comfortable with. I tried going for like that homey, cozy, modern farmhouse look with my photos a few times, just as an example, and I did not enjoy it. It felt like
Oh.
work. It wasn't fun. And so I ditched it pretty quickly. And it's the same thing with anything with marketing. If it makes you uncomfortable or you really just don't enjoy it at all, you don't need to do it. There are so
Mm-hmm.
many other avenues for marketing that you don't need to force yourself to do something that you just really detest.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you'll be more
Absolutely.
likely to put it off. And then that's not going to help you either.
Well, no, definitely not. I have had those days. I can
Yes.
say for sure that, oh, I don't feel like doing this today, so I'm just not, which probably not great. But
The
so
other
I
day with
think,
the laundry.
yes, I think when it comes down to understanding your audience, it's one of those things where there's not necessarily good and bad ways to do it, but there is you should do it. You should at least think about it. You should consider this, if not to aid you more than anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are authors who are successful who may not be doing this very religiously. And
Right.
then there are authors who are also successful. But I think when it comes to peace of mind and ease of writing and marketing, knowing your audience is only going to be a good thing.
Oh, yes. And it's very possible, too, that you have decided who your audience is and you just haven't realized it yet.
Oh, that's a good point. Have you seen that in authors that you've worked with as an editor?
Yes, sometimes, and we'll start having conversations about, well, who do you envision reading this book? If you had to picture somebody walking into a bookstore and they see your book and they have that, that little happy squeal when they see your cover and think, yes, this is a book for me, how would you describe that person? What other books do they enjoy? What else do they enjoy doing? And that helps kind of that visualization process, in my opinion, at least with what I've found so far, has really helped with coming together and putting an audience together and saying, yes, I write for this kind of person. Or even when you have the author who might say, I write for myself. Okay, well, what are you like? What kind of person are you? What do you enjoy? What do you like seeing? What is your life like?
Those are the very important
So there are ways
questions.
to
Yeah.
pull those things out, and maybe you just haven't really thought about it before, but they're there.
And I'm glad we're having this conversation because I've never thought about. You mentioned what type of person walks in, sees your book, and squeals on the shelf. It's a little bit of a silly scenario, but at the same
Yes.
time, that was the first time I was like, actually, I could probably answer those questions. Like, I think,
Oh,
I think
good.
there's just, I've been trying to think about it a really, I guess, more, how do I say this, boring, kind of blocky
A
way of
very
who is,
cerebral way.
yeah, exactly. Like, who is the audience? Like, how old are they? What do they look like? I'm
When
just
do
like,
they
oh,
file
I
their
don't know.
taxes every year?
Right. When were they born? All this stuff is just like, I don't know the answer to these things. But when you put it that way of, someone who, just another situation that came to my mind that I hadn't thought of, the person that sits up reading your book because they can't go to sleep. There's
Hmm.
like, I'm reading this book and I can't get out of it. It's like,
Yep.
oh, I might even be able to think of a person like that. So just
Or if
creative
you're
ways to think about
already,
it.
right. And if you've already have books that you've written where you know those people or they've posted on your social media or gotten in touch with you, you already have a glimpse of what your audience looks like. It could
Yeah,
be
that's true.
Joe in Wyoming who told me he read every book the day it came out. Well, what is Joe from Wyoming like?
Mm-hmm.
There
Yeah.
you go. That is your ideal audience.
I love that. I know I have a pretty big fan in India, coincidentally,
Oh,
kind of
nice.
randomly, but they love my books and they've talked many times about how they couldn't believe that they were self-published. I was like, oh, I really appreciate that.
Hmm.
So just knowing that person and getting to know them as well. I mean, it never hurts to get to know real people too. Like you said, people who have
Yeah.
talked about your books and gushed about them. Get to know them, befriend them, have that community. It's
Hmm.
going to be worth everybody's time to get to know each other and learn about their preferences and in reading and whatnot.
I completely agree.
So
Yes.
I'm coming away with this with many ideas,
All
which is
right.
helpful.
Yeah,
So,
I think it also helps them too, knowing that their author is not just, an automaton sitting behind a keyboard typing out story after story, that this is a real person and they do have a life apart from this. And there's just something about having that humanity injected into it. And the same
mhm.
with our readers, we're not just seeing it as how much money did I get in my Amazon check this month or whatever. It's, oh, thank you, Joe from Wyoming. I see you bought my book. Thanks so
Mhm.
much.
Yeah, we don't talk about the money because most of the time it's less than $1. But no, I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
I've always
It's
said when
better than
people ask,
that.
yeah, do not write because you want it for the money. You have to really, really want to be doing this.
It's interesting that there are people like that because I am not that way. I'm writing because I love it, and
Hmm.
I started writing my first book. I've always wanted to write, but I started writing my first book on a challenge from my friend, and I haven't been able to
Oh,
stop. I can't stop. I just have to write because it's fun, and five published book later, and
right.
multiple other manuscripts. I'm like, oh, this turned into a thing that I didn't expect it to turn into.
Your friend probably didn't either.
But yeah, it's just amazing how that happens.
Hmm.
So find your audience, whether or not you write it down, think about it, try to understand it, see how that aids you in your marketing and in the writing of your future books. In the end, it's just going to be beneficial for you.
Yep.
It's just the moral of the story, so to speak.
Just
We
summed that up so
honestly
nicely.
we probably could talk for hours about this. There's so many other things that we can and other directions we could come at when it comes to learning your audience. But unfortunately, we are running short on time. So I
Mhm.
always love to ask you, where can people find more information about you and your services if maybe they're interested in having you edit for them?
For my editing services, they can find me at jenniaedits.com. That's JENNIAEDITS. And from there, I'm also linked to my socials. So I'm on Instagram a lot, but that's more of a personal, fun thing. Being an
Mhm.
influencer with some of the bigger book publishers is just my hobby
Oh, cool.
because it's fun.
I think that's
And
amazing.
yes. And then I'm also the creative nonfiction expert at the National Association of Independent Writers and Editors. And I have a blog over there as well as a webinar.
Okay, that is awesome. I'll make sure to put all of these links in the show notes so people can easily access them. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been very helpful.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you.